People like to say you can judge a company by its mission statement. I learned the truth was buried deeper, behind locked server doors, undocumented systems, and the people who quietly kept everything from collapsing. For 11 years, I was one of those people. My name is Elena Cross, and I worked at Valencore Systems, a mid-sized tech firm that liked to call itself innovative while surviving entirely on patched legacy infrastructure. I wasn't flashy. I didn't speak in buzzwords or post motivational quotes on LinkedIn. I fixed things, usually at 2 a.m., usually without anyone knowing there had been a problem in the first place. I built fail-safes no one asked for. I wrote scripts no one bothered to document. When systems failed, I made sure they came back before executives noticed. That was my reward, invisibility. Everything changed the day Sienna Vale arrived. She walked into her first all-hands meeting like a lifestyle influencer stepping onto a podcast set, perfect hair, pastel blazer, and a ring light she insisted on using for clarity. She introduced herself as the new Chief Strategy Officer, fresh from marrying the CEO's son after what the company gossip described as a transformational wellness retreat. Within 10 minutes, she called our core systems ancient, asked if anyone still used Java unironically, and announced would be sunsetting outdated talent. People laughed nervously. I stayed quiet. Sienna didn't know that the billing platform she dismissed was held together by custom logic I'd written years ago. She didn't know that half the company's compliance reporting relied on scripts that existed only on my secured access. And she definitely didn't know that several critical licenses were valid solely because I personally managed their renewals. But I knew something else. I knew that leadership never protects what it doesn't understand. Over the next few weeks, Sienna rolled out changes fast, too fast. She replaced experienced engineers with agile thinkers, approved migrations without audits, and dismissed every concern as legacy fear. I documented everything. Quietly. Then, one Thursday afternoon at 4:30 p.m., a calendar invite appeared on my screen. Subject: Quick Sync, HR no agenda. No context. That's when I understood. I wasn't being removed because I failed. I was being removed because I made someone else look small. And Valencore was about to learn what happens when you fire the person holding the spine together. The meeting invite sat on my screen for hours like a quiet threat. 4:30 p.m. End of day. End of week. End of patience. Everyone in tech knows what a meeting without an agenda means. It's not a conversation. It's a conclusion. When I walked into the HR office, Sienna Vale was already there, perched casually on the edge of the desk like she was waiting for a photo shoot to start. Her smile was soft, rehearsed, and completely hollow. Beside her sat Marcus Hill from HR, clutching a branded folder, as if it might explode. "Elena, thank you for coming," Sienna said brightly. "This won't take long." Of course it wouldn't. She spoke in the familiar corporate dialect: realignment, efficiency, future-forward vision, each phrase delivered like it had been copied directly from a slide deck she didn't fully understand. According to her, my role had become redundant. The company was moving toward younger, more agile talent. Collaboration over specialization. I listened without interrupting. Marcus slid the folder toward me. Severance details. Non-compete language. 3 months of coverage if I signed quickly. They always count on shock to make people careless. But I wasn't shocked. I'd seen this company survive on duct tape and luck for over a decade. I knew exactly how fragile the system really was. And I knew how much of it only worked because I made it work. "Any questions?" Sienna asked, tilting her head like she was expecting tears or anger. I stood up instead. I unclipped my badge and placed it on the desk gently, the way you set something down when you don't need it anymore. "You have 15 minutes, I said. Sienna frowned. I'm sorry. 15 minutes, I repeated calmly. Before things stop compensating. Her smile twitched, just for a second. She didn't understand what I meant, but something in my tone unsettled her. I leaned closer, not threatening, not emotional. This isn't revenge, I said. I'm just done fixing problems no one wants to admit exist. Then I walked out. No raised voices. No slammed doors. Just the quiet click of my shoes down the hallway as the countdown began. I didn't go home. I crossed the street to a small cafe, ordered black coffee, and sat by the window facing the building. Valancourt's lights were still on. Everything looked normal. For now. My phone stayed silent. And somewhere inside that glass tower, systems were already beginning to forget how to save themselves. The first failure was small. Almost polite. An automated email bounced back to sender. Then another. Somewhere inside Valancourt's infrastructure, a background process failed to restart, and no one noticed, because no one knew it was supposed to exist. I sat in the cafe, coffee cooling in my hands, watching the building like a storm watcher studies the horizon. 10 minutes in, my phone vibrated. A message from Nora in finance. Hey, weird question, do you know where the Q4 reconciliation tool lives? It's not loading. I didn't respond. A second buzz followed, this time from Evan, procurement. Elena, are you seeing this? The vendor portal just locked everyone out. Inside the building, dashboards were lighting up in colors executives hate. Red replaced green. Warning banners stacked like bad news headlines. API calls began returning errors, and the internal ticketing system cheerfully informed employees their session had expired and they should contact their system administrator. The system administrator they'd just let go. By minute 12, LinkedIn had noticed. A vendor posted a carefully worded update about temporary service interruptions. The comments underneath told the real story. Someone asked if Valancourt had lost its back-end lead. Another replied with a single word, apparently. On the 15th floor, Sienna Vale was discovering the difference between confidence and competence. Her cloud migration, rushed, undocumented, and approved without a compliance audit, had begun unraveling. Credentials didn't match. Licenses failed validation. Failsafes that used to catch those mistakes simply weren't there anymore. Because they had never belonged to the company. They had belonged to me. My phone lit up again. Then again. Slack messages, emails, missed calls. The CEO's assistant. Legal. Finance. Operations. I flipped the phone face down. Across the cafe, the barista raised an eyebrow at the steady stream of notifications lighting up my table. I smiled politely and took another sip. At 10:46 a.m., the main supply chain node failed. Seconds later, authentication failed for 3 major clients. Live billing transactions spilled into a sandbox environment that was never meant to touch real money. That's when the CEO left a board meeting mid-sentence. In the server room, outsourced technicians stared at blinking racks they didn't recognize. Someone asked for a rollback script. No one had one. Because rollback was something I used to do quietly, at night, without credit. Now there was only noise. And panic. And the growing realization that this wasn't sabotage. This was what happened when the person holding everything together simply stopped. The first apology came at 11:07 a.m. It wasn't sincere. It never is when panic writes the script. My phone rang once, stopped, rang again. I let it ring until silence felt uncomfortable, even for them. Then I answered. Elena, said Mark Holloway, Valancourt's CEO, voice tight and controlled. We are experiencing some instability. Some. I looked out the cafe window at the tower where 15 years of my life were now burning through emergency protocols. I'm aware, I said. A pause. He hadn't expected that. We'd like you to come back in, he continued carefully. Just for today. Help us stabilize, then we can discuss. Discuss what? I asked. Silence stretched. Somewhere behind him, someone was shouting about client exposure and regulatory logs. You were terminated under unclear circumstances, Mark said. We are prepared to acknowledge that. Prepared to acknowledge. Not apologize. I no longer have system access, I replied calmly. That was revoked at 9:42 a.m. Another pause, sharper this time. Yes, well, security can reinstate it. No, I said. They can't. Because the access keys weren't stored in their system. They were stored in mine, on a physical token paired to my biometric ID. A design choice I'd made after the third data breach scare. At 11:19, legal joined the call. Then finance. Then someone from risk who had never spoken to me before in his life. They spoke in overlapping voices, offering titles, bonuses, apologies shaped like excuses. I listened. Finally, I said, you fired me publicly for misalignment of culture. That's in the HR record. Yes, legal admitted. That entry can be amended. No, I said again. It can't. Another truth they didn't know yet. The firing triggered a clause in my employment contract, one no one had read because I'd written it myself years ago, and buried it under compliance language. Upon termination without cause, all proprietary systems personally authored by me reverted to personal intellectual property. Their silence was absolute. What do you want? Mark asked finally. I looked at the time. 11:34 a.m. The European market would open in 20 minutes. I want nothing from Valancourt, I said. But I am open to consulting. The word landed like a life raft. Terms were discussed fast, desperate. Emergency authority. Independent control. A 6-figure daily rate. Full public retraction. I agreed to none of it yet. There's one condition, I said. Sienna Vale is removed from operational authority. Effective immediately. Another pause. Longer. She's my VP, Mark said. And she's your liability, I replied. Choose. When the call ended, I hadn't won. But I had been invited back, on my terms. And inside that tower, they were finally learning what power actually looked like. I didn't return to Valancourt that afternoon. That was the first mistake they didn't expect. By 1:15 p.m., the European markets had opened, and with them came questions, sharp, technical questions that only one person had ever answered without notes. Me? Their stock dipped 2 points in 20 minutes. By 1:47, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Mark Holloway. It was Daniel Cross, chairman of the board. Elena, he said, skipping pleasantries. We need you in the building. No, I replied. Another pause. This one was heavier. Daniel understood leverage. That's why he'd survived 3 hostile takeovers, and 1 very quiet federal investigation. What do you want? He asked. I want the truth corrected, I said. Publicly. That takes time. No, I said calmly. It takes courage. At 2:03 p.m., Valancourt issued a revised internal memo. The language was careful, legal, bloodless, but the message was clear. Elena Moore's termination was conducted without board authorization, and is under formal review. It wasn't an apology. It was surrender. I arrived at the building at 2:40 p.m., not through the executive entrance, but through the front doors. No announcement. No escort. Just heels on marble and silence spreading outward like a ripple. People looked up. Some smiled with relief. Others looked away, ashamed. Sienna Vale wasn't at her desk. She was in conference room C, surrounded by legal, HR, and 2 security officers who suddenly wouldn't meet her eyes. Her white confidence suit from the morning was gone, replaced by a grey cardigan and shaking hands. I didn't stop. The boardroom door opened without resistance. Inside, 12 executives waited like defendants. Mark stood. "Elena, sit," I said. He did. I connected my tablet to the main screen. One file opened. Then another. Then 6 more. Live dashboards. Market exposure stabilized. Partner calls resolved. The European fund stopped its withdrawal mid-process. The room exhaled. "I am not your employee," I said. "I am your solution." No one argued. "I will consult," I continued, "for 48 hours only. After that, I leave, with or without your blessing." Daniel nodded slowly. "And Sienna?" "She's done," I said. "Not fired. Removed. Permanently." The silence was final. When I walked out of the room, Valancourt was still standing. But it no longer belonged to them. They just hadn't realized it. By the next morning, the building felt different. Not loud. Not chaotic. Quiet in the way a courtroom goes silent right before a verdict. I arrived at 8:10 a.m., coffee in hand, credentials temporarily restored but irrelevant. Power no longer lived in keycards. It lived in awareness, and everyone was watching me. Sienna Vale hadn't been removed yet. That process required signatures, legal choreography, and the one thing she no longer had, allies. At 8:42, HR requested a private meeting. I declined. At 9 o'clock, legal tried. I ignored it. At 9:17, Sienna found me herself. She stood at the end of the glass corridor, like a ghost who hadn't realized she was dead yet. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "You did this." I didn't look up from my screen. "You did this to humiliate me," she said. "No," I replied. "You did this to yourself." I just stopped cushioning the fall. She stepped closer. "You embarrassed my father. You embarrassed the board. You embarrassed the company," I said, finally meeting her eyes. "And you mistook authority for competence." Her face flushed. I followed protocol. "You weaponized it," I corrected. "That's different." At 10:30 a.m., the board convened an emergency session. By 10:47, Sienna's access was revoked. By 11:02, her name disappeared from internal directories. By 11:19, security escorted her out, quietly, through a side exit she'd never noticed before. No announcement. No spectacle. Just erasure. The market responded immediately. Analysts love blood in the water, but they love stability more. By noon, the stock recovered. By 2 p.m., partners stopped asking if I was returning and started asking who would replace me. That was the point. I wasn't here to reclaim a throne. I was here to end one. At 4:45 p.m., Daniel Cross approached me alone. No assistance. No legal buffer. "You've made your point," he said. "What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," I said, "you survive without me." He frowned. "We are not ready." "You never will be," I replied. "That's why you depended on me instead of empowering others." He nodded slowly, absorbing the truth. At 5:12 p.m., I sent my final report. At 5:13, I disconnected. When I walked out of Valancourt that evening, no one followed. No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. They didn't need to. They would feel my absence every single day. I didn't wake up to an alarm the next morning. For the first time in years, there was no urgency vibrating through my bones, no calendar reminders screaming for attention. Just light slipping through the curtains and the quiet understanding that I no longer belonged to anyone's emergency. By 9 a.m., the headlines started. Valancourt faces leadership shakeup after internal power struggle. Board investigates unauthorized termination of senior strategist. Market recovers, questions remain. They never used my name in the first article. They used it in the second. By noon, Sienna Vale's professional profile vanished from the company website. Her father issued a statement about personal family matters and declined further comment. Silence, in corporate language, is admission. I spent the morning walking the city. No suit. No badge. Just distance. At 1:30 p.m., Daniel Cross emailed. We underestimated you. That will not happen again. I didn't reply. At 3 p.m., a recruiter from a firm I'd turned down twice before asked if I was open to conversations. I told her I was open to ownership. She said she'd call back. By evening, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and watched the skyline glow, Valancourt's tower among it, still tall, still impressive, and permanently diminished. They would continue. They always do. But they would do so without the woman who knew where every lever was hidden. Power doesn't scream when it leaves. It doesn't threaten or beg. It doesn't need witnesses. It simply withdraws and lets the vacuum do the damage. My phone buzzed once more. A message from an unknown number. You taught us something we won't forget. I smiled and turned the phone face down. Lessons learned through loss tend to stick. Later that night, I packed away my old work bag, the one that had started the whole thing. I didn't throw it out. History deserves preservation. I replaced it with something new. Something lighter. Something mine. The city hummed below, indifferent and endless. And for the first time, so was my future.